I should have known better than to get on that yacht. But here I was, watching Miguel throw another duffel bag onto the pristine white deck like he was packing for a month-long expedition instead of a 3-day camping trip. The boat looked like something out of a magazine, all sleek lines and polished chrome that probably cost more than I'd make in 5 years as a park ranger. "Jazz, you're gonna love this place," Miguel called out, that familiar grin spreading across his face as he adjusted his expensive sunglasses. Completely untouched. No tourists, no cell service, just us in paradise. The no cell service part made my stomach tighten, but I forced a smile and hauled my single backpack aboard. Keith was already sprawled across one of the leather seats, looking perfectly at home in a way that made me both envious and annoyed. He'd grown up with even less money than me, but somehow he never seemed bothered by the massive wealth gap in our group. "This is insane, man," Keith laughed, running his hand along the yacht's railing. "I can't believe you just rented this thing for the weekend." "Rented?" Miguel scoffed. "I bought it." "Well, technically my trust fund bought it, but same difference." "Of course he did." I bit back the comment about how that money could have funded my entire department's conservation programs for a year and focused on securing my gear. Colton stomped aboard last, his work boots leaving scuff marks on the deck that made me wince. "About time we did something worth doing," he said, cracking open a beer even though it wasn't even noon yet. I was getting tired of sitting around talking about adventures instead of having them. The dig was clearly aimed at me, since I'd been the one arguing against this trip for weeks. Not because I didn't want to celebrate Miguel's birthday, but because I knew exactly how these things went. Miguel would come up with increasingly dangerous ideas. Keith would encourage him because he couldn't stand disappointing anyone, and Colton would escalate everything into a pissing contest. Meanwhile, I'd be the killjoy trying to keep everyone alive. "Here we go," I muttered under my breath, but Miguel caught it. "Come on, Jazz. Live a little. When's the last time you did something spontaneous?" Spontaneous and stupid aren't the same thing. "See? This is exactly what I'm talking about." Miguel started the engine, which purred to life with the kind of smooth power that only serious money could buy. You analyze everything to death. Sometimes you just have to trust that things will work out. Easy for him to say. When you had unlimited money and family connections, things usually did work out. The rest of us didn't have that luxury. The ride out took 3 hours, and I had to admit the water was incredible. Crystal clear and shifting from turquoise to deep blue as we moved into open ocean. Keith kept up a steady stream of stories that had us all laughing despite my mood, and even I started to relax as the mainland disappeared behind us. Then I saw our destination. The island was small, maybe half a mile across, with a narrow beach and dense vegetation that looked like it hadn't been touched by human hands. Beautiful, sure, but also completely isolated. What made my chest tighten was the stretch of water between our island and another landmass in the distance. Maybe 2 miles of choppy, dark water that moved in patterns I didn't like. "Miguel," I said as he cut the engine and we drifted toward shore. "Those currents look pretty strong." He followed my gaze to the channel between the islands and shrugged. "It's fine. I researched this place thoroughly." Researching for Miguel usually meant looking at Instagram photos and reading a few travel blogs, but I didn't push it. Yet. We anchored about 50 yards from the beach and waded ashore with our supplies. The sand was perfect white powder that squeaked under our feet, and I had to admit the place was stunning. Palm trees swayed in the breeze, and the only sounds were waves and bird calls. Under different circumstances, I might have actually enjoyed this. Setting up camp took most of the afternoon. Miguel had brought enough gear for a small army. A massive tent that could sleep 8 portable chairs, a camp stove that looked like it belonged in a restaurant kitchen, and coolers full of food and alcohol. Way too much alcohol. "This is what I'm talking about," Colton said, surveying our little beach camp as the sun started to sink toward the horizon. "No rules, no schedules, just us doing whatever we want." Miguel produced a bottle of whiskey that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Time to celebrate properly. I accepted the cup he handed me, telling myself I'd nurse it slowly. But Keith launched into one of his stories about a disastrous family reunion, complete with voices and gestures that had us all cracking up. And somehow my cup kept getting refilled. The whiskey was smooth and warm, and for the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders relax. "Remember that time in college when you convinced us to sneak into the abandoned brewery?" Keith asked Miguel, his eyes bright with alcohol and nostalgia. "That was epic." Miguel grinned. "Security chased us for like 6 blocks. "You mean security chased us," Colton corrected. "You had your dad's lawyer on speed dial." There was an edge to his voice that made the air tense for a moment, but Keith smoothly redirected with another story, and the moment passed. This was how it always went. Colton would make some comment about Miguel's privilege. Miguel would get defensive, and Keith would play peacemaker while I sat there pretending not to notice the dysfunction. The whiskey made it easier to ignore. By the time the stars came out, we were all pretty drunk. Miguel had moved on to tequila, Keith was singing old songs in a surprisingly good voice, and even I was feeling loose and giggly in a way I rarely allowed myself. Colton had been getting progressively louder and more aggressive with each drink, but that was normal for him. "You know what we should do?" Miguel said suddenly, staring out at the dark water. The other island was barely visible now, just a shadow against the star-filled sky. I felt my stomach drop. I knew that tone. "We should swim over there," he continued, pointing toward the distant shore. "How cool would that be? Swimming between islands in the middle of the night. That's like 2 miles, I said immediately. "And the current—" "Oh, come on," Colton interrupted. "It's not that far. And we're all good swimmers. Good swimmers don't swim drunk in the dark," I shot back. But Keith was already nodding enthusiastically. "That would be incredible," he said. "Like something out of a movie." "Exactly." Miguel jumped to his feet, swaying slightly. "This is the kind of story we'll tell for the rest of our lives. If we survive to tell it," I muttered, but they weren't listening. Miguel was already pulling off his shirt, and Colton was kicking off his boots. "Guys, seriously," I tried again, standing up too fast and immediately regretting it as the world spun. "Look at that water. Those currents are no joke, and you're all wasted." "You're being paranoid again," Miguel said, but not unkindly. "We'll be fine. We're not idiots." "Could have fooled me," I snapped, the alcohol making me more honest than usual. Colton's face darkened. "If you're too scared, just stay here. We don't need a babysitter. This isn't about being scared, it's about not being stupid. That water is dangerous, especially at night, especially drunk. Everything's dangerous to you," Miguel said, stepping out of his shorts. "Sometimes you have to take risks to really live." Keith was already down to his boxers, caught up in the excitement. "Come on, Jazz, when are we ever going to get another chance like this?" I looked at their faces. Miguel's reckless confidence, Keith's eager enthusiasm, Colton's challenging smirk, and felt the familiar weight of being the only adult in the room. They were going to do this whether I agreed or not. They always did. "Fine," I said finally, "but I'm staying here as lookout. Someone needs to be sober enough to call for help when you idiots get in trouble." "See? Perfect plan," Miguel grinned, apparently taking my capitulation as approval. "Jazz keeps watch. We swim over and back. Everyone's happy." I wanted to scream that this wasn't a perfect plan, that this was exactly the kind of reckless stupidity that got people killed. But they were already wading into the dark water, laughing and splashing like this was some kind of game. "Stay close together," I called out, my voice tight with anxiety. "And if the current feels too strong, turn back immediately." "Yes, Mom," Colton called back, but his voice was already getting fainter as they moved deeper into the water. I watched their heads disappear into the choppy waves, 3 pale dots moving away from shore, and felt dread settle in my stomach like a stone. The whiskey that had made me feel warm and relaxed now just made me nauseous. This was going to end badly. I could feel it in my bones. I watched their heads bob in the dark water like 3 pale buoys, getting smaller and smaller until I had to squint to make them out. The sound of their laughter carried back on the wind for maybe the first 10 minutes. Then nothing but waves slapping against the shore. "Stay together," I called out, even though I wasn't sure they could hear me anymore. The flashlight beam barely reached them now, just catching glimpses of movement that could have been arms cutting through water or could have been my imagination. 20 minutes passed, then 30. I kept checking my watch, the numbers glowing green in the darkness, telling myself they were just taking their time. Strong swimmers, all of them. Miguel had been on his high school swim team. Keith grew up near a lake. Even Colton, for all his faults, was built like a tank and could probably power through anything. But the current was pulling them sideways. I could see it in the way the waves moved, how the water seemed to grab at everything and drag it toward the open ocean. I'd tried to tell them, but they never listened to me about anything. "Miguel," I shouted, cupping my hands around my mouth. "Keith, can you hear me?" Nothing, just the endless sound of water moving in the dark. An hour went by, then another. I paced the beach until I'd worn a path in the sand, sweeping the flashlight back and forth across the waves like some kind of demented lighthouse. My voice was getting hoarse from calling their names, but I couldn't stop. They had to be out there somewhere. Maybe they'd made it to the other island and were just resting. Maybe they'd decided to wait until morning to swim back. That would be like them, turn the whole thing into an adventure, camp out on the beach, come back with stories about sleeping under the stars. But deep down, I knew better. That current had been pulling hard, and they'd been drunk, and swimming 2 miles in the dark was insane, even under perfect conditions. I needed to do something. The yacht bobbed at anchor, its white hull gleaming in the moonlight, and I waded out to it with some half-formed plan of using the radio or driving the boat myself to search for them. But when I climbed aboard and stared at the control panel, it might as well have been the cockpit of a spaceship. Buttons and switches and digital displays that meant nothing to me. I tried turning things on and off, pressing whatever looked important, but the engine wouldn't start, and I was probably just making things worse. "Come on," I muttered, jabbing at a red button that seemed promising. How hard can this be? Pretty hard, apparently. The boat had some kind of security system or safety protocol that I couldn't figure out, and after 20 minutes of random button pushing, I gave up. My hands were shaking now, and not just from the night air. I had to find help. Real help, with people who knew these waters and had proper boats and radios that actually worked. The island was small. There had to be someone else here, maybe a caretaker or other campers or a research station, something. I grabbed the flashlight and headed inland, pushing through the palm trees and scrubby vegetation that looked so tropical and harmless in daylight, but now seemed like a wall of shadows trying to block my way. Branches caught at my hair and scratched my arms, and within minutes I was completely turned around. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. "Is anyone there? I need help." The jungle swallowed my words. I kept walking, or thought I was walking in a straight line, but everything looked the same in the flashlight beam. Trees and bushes, and more trees, with no sign that humans had ever set foot here. My throat was raw from shouting. My legs felt like rubber. I'd been running on adrenaline and panic for hours, and now my body was starting to shut down. When I stumbled over a root and went down hard, scraping my palms on the rocky ground, I just lay there for a minute and tried not to cry. They were gone. I knew it now, had probably known it from the moment they disappeared into that dark water. Miguel with his reckless confidence, Keith with his need to please everyone, Colton with his stupid pride, all of them too drunk and too stubborn to turn back when the current got too strong. I must have fallen asleep there on the ground, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through the trees and my whole body ached like I'd been hit by a truck. My mouth tasted like sand and fear, and for a confused moment I couldn't remember where I was or why I was lying in the dirt. Then it all came rushing back. I sat up too fast and immediately regretted it as the world spun around me. Through the trees I could see buildings, actual buildings with walls and roofs and everything. A village maybe a quarter-mile away that I'd somehow missed completely in the dark. The walk there felt like it took forever. My legs kept wanting to give out, and I had to stop every few steps to catch my breath. But eventually I stumbled out of the jungle and onto a dirt road lined with small houses painted in bright colors that hurt my eyes in the morning sun. An elderly man was sitting on his porch drinking coffee from a chipped mug, and when he saw me he nearly dropped it. "Lord have mercy," he said, standing up so fast his chair rocked back. "Child, what happened to you?" I tried to answer, but all that came out was a croak. He disappeared into his house and came back with a glass of water that I drank so fast I almost choked. My friends, I finally managed. They went swimming last night and they never came back. I need to call someone, the Coast Guard or police or... "Slow down," he said gently. His voice had a musical accent that I couldn't place, and his dark eyes were kind but worried. "Tell me what happened." So I did. The whole story came pouring out. The yacht, the drinking, the stupid plan to swim between islands, the hours of waiting and searching and getting lost in the jungle. He listened without interrupting, his expression getting more and more grave. "My name's Jimmy Thomas," he said when I finished, "and we need to get you some help right away." He led me inside and made a phone call, speaking in rapid-fire words I couldn't follow. Within an hour, there were boats on the water, Coast Guard cutters and local fishing vessels, all of them searching the channel where my friends had disappeared. I spent the next 2 days in a haze of interviews and waiting and staring at the horizon, hoping to see 3 familiar figures waving from some distant beach. The Coast Guard asked me the same questions over and over. What time did they enter the water? What was their condition? Did I see which direction the current took them? I answered as best I could, but the details kept getting fuzzy, like my brain was trying to protect me from remembering too clearly. On the third day, they found them. Miguel washed up on a small island about 5 miles south, his body battered by rocks and currents. Keith was discovered on a different beach, face down in the sand like he'd tried to crawl ashore. Colton they pulled from the water itself, still floating in his boxers, his skin pale and bloated from 2 days in the ocean. The Coast Guard captain was gentle when he told me, but the words hit like physical blows anyway. Drowning, all 3 of them, probably caught in a rip current that pulled them out to sea faster than they could swim back. "I'm sorry," he said, "but there was nothing you could have done. That current is a killer. We've lost people there before." I nodded and thanked him and did all the things you're supposed to do when someone delivers terrible news. But inside, all I could think was that I should have tried harder to stop them. Should have hidden their clothes or disabled the boat or just flat out refused to come on this trip in the first place. Jimmy Thomas drove me to the airport himself, his old truck rattling over the island roads while I stared out the window at water that looked so innocent in the daylight, blue and clear and beautiful, like it hadn't just swallowed 3 people I cared about. "You take care of yourself," he said as he helped me with my bag. "And remember, sometimes the ocean takes what it wants, no matter what we do to stop it." I wanted to ask him what he meant by that, but my flight was boarding, and I was too exhausted to think straight. All I wanted was to go home and sleep for about a week and try to figure out how to live with the fact that my 3 best friends were dead because I hadn't been able to talk them out of being idiots. The plane lifted off over water that sparkled like diamonds in the afternoon sun, and I closed my eyes and tried not to think about what was floating somewhere beneath those pretty waves. I stared at the same stretch of beach where everything had gone wrong 3 days ago, watching the police investigators take photos and measurements like they could somehow capture the stupidity that had killed my friends. The water looked so innocent in the afternoon sunlight, just pretty blue waves lapping at white sand, not the monster that had swallowed 3 people I'd known since college. "Miss Kelly, we'll need you to walk us through the timeline one more time," Detective Morrison said, flipping open his notebook. He was a tired-looking guy in his 50s who'd probably seen enough drowning cases to fill a book, but he was being patient with me even though I'd already told this story twice. I pointed to where we'd set up camp, where Miguel had produced that expensive whiskey, where they'd stripped down and waded into the dark water while I stood here like an idiot, watching it happen. The investigators nodded and scribbled notes, asking about currents and visibility and blood alcohol levels, all the clinical details that were supposed to make sense of senseless deaths. "That should do it," Morrison said finally, closing his notebook. "We'll have the final report ready in a few weeks, but this looks pretty straightforward. Tragic accident, strong currents, alcohol involved. I'm sorry for your loss. Straightforward, right. 3 of my closest friends were dead because they'd been too drunk and stubborn to listen to reason, and apparently that qualified as straightforward these days." The investigators headed back to their boat, leaving me alone on the beach with nothing but the sound of waves and my own guilt for company. I should have left with them, should have gotten on the first plane home and started the long process of figuring out how to live without Miguel's reckless energy and Keith's terrible jokes, and even Colton's aggressive bullshit. Instead, I found myself walking toward the village where Jimmy Thomas had helped me 3 days ago. I found him in the same spot on his porch, drinking coffee from the same chipped mug, like he'd been waiting for me to come back. But something was different about him now. The kindness was still there in his dark eyes, but there was something else too. Worry, maybe, or fear. "I wondered if you'd return," he said quietly, setting down his mug. "How are you holding up, child?" "I've been better." I sat down in the chair next to his without being invited, suddenly exhausted. The police finished their investigation. Accidental drowning, case closed. Jimmy nodded slowly, but he didn't look satisfied with that explanation. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the water like he was trying to decide something. "There's things about these waters the police don't understand," he said finally. "Things that don't make it into their reports." "What do you mean?" He glanced around like he was checking to make sure we were alone, then leaned forward in his chair. "You ever hear of jumbies?" I shook my head, though something about the word made my skin crawl. "Evil spirits," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "They live in the deep water, and they call to people, make them do things they wouldn't normally do. Make swimming in dangerous currents seem like the best idea in the world." "Jimmy, I know how it sounds," he interrupted, "but I've lived on this island for 67 years, and I've seen it happen before. Young people, usually tourists, they come here and something calls to them from the water. They go swimming at night, or in bad weather, or when they're too drunk to know better, and they don't come back. The rational part of my brain wanted to dismiss this as local superstition, the kind of folklore that grew up around dangerous places to explain away preventable tragedies. But there was something in Jimmy's voice, a certainty that made me listen despite myself. "You're saying my friends were, what, possessed?" "I'm saying they heard something that night that made them want to swim to that other island more than they wanted to stay safe. Something that made it impossible to resist, even for smart people who should have known better." I thought about Miguel's sudden fixation on the swim, how he'd gone from relaxed and happy to absolutely determined in the space of a few seconds, how Keith had immediately agreed even though he was usually more cautious, how even Colton, who talked a big game but was actually pretty risk-averse when it came down to it, had stripped down without hesitation. "That's just alcohol," I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. "People do stupid things when they're drunk. Maybe." Jimmy picked up his coffee mug again, wrapping his weathered hands around it like he was trying to warm himself. "But the Jumbies, they don't just take people, they keep them, use them to call to others." "What does that mean?" "It means they can take the shape of the dead, use their voices, their faces, everything that made them who they were. And they use those shapes to trick the living into joining them." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. "Why are you telling me this?" Jimmy's eyes met mine, and I saw genuine fear there. "Because you were there that night, you saw their work, and now they know about you." "That's," I started to say, ridiculous, but the word stuck in my throat. Because there had been something wrong about that night, something beyond just bad decision-making and dangerous currents. The way Miguel had stared at the water before suggesting the swim, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. The way all three of them had seemed so certain, so eager, like they were being pulled by invisible strings. "I have to go," I said, standing up too quickly. "My flight leaves in a few hours." Jimmy nodded, but he looked sad. "You take care of yourself, child. And if you start seeing things that shouldn't be there, hearing voices you recognize, don't listen, don't go to them, no matter how much you want to." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but I was already backing away from his porch, suddenly desperate to get off this island and back to my normal life where dead people stayed dead and evil spirits were just stories people told to scare each other. The flight home was a blur of airport terminals and recycled air, and trying not to think about Jimmy's warnings. By the time I got back to my apartment in Portland, I'd almost convinced myself that grief was making me paranoid, that I was looking for supernatural explanations because accepting the simple truth was too painful. My friends had died because they'd been drunk and stupid and unlucky. That was horrible enough without adding ghost stories to the mix. For the first few days, I almost believed it. I went through the motions of normal life, called in sick to work, ordered takeout, avoided the news stories about the tragic boating accident that had claimed 3 young lives. I started making lists of people to call about funeral arrangements, though the thought of standing in front of a room full of mourners and explaining how I'd watched my friends walk into the ocean made me sick. But then the weird stuff started. It began small. I'd be sitting in my living room and hear laughter from the kitchen, the kind of bright, infectious sound Keith made when he was telling one of his stories. I'd go check, but the kitchen would be empty, just dirty dishes and the hum of the refrigerator. Or I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, turn to look, and see Miguel's reflection in the bathroom mirror for just a split second before it disappeared. I told myself it was grief playing tricks on me, that my brain was trying to process trauma by conjuring up familiar faces and voices. People saw dead relatives all the time after losing someone close. It was normal, even healthy. But then I woke up one night to the sound of wet footprints in my hallway. I lay in bed listening to the soft squelch of water on hardwood, the deliberate pace of someone walking slowly from my front door toward my bedroom. My apartment was on the 3rd floor. There was no way someone could have gotten in without me hearing them, and definitely no way they'd be dripping wet. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting for a knock or the sound of the door opening, but there was nothing, just silence and the faint smell of salt water seeping under the door. When I finally worked up the courage to look, the hallway was empty, but the wet footprints were real, dark patches on the wood floor that led from the front door to my bedroom, and then I spent the rest of the night sitting in my kitchen with all the lights on, drinking coffee and trying to come up with rational explanations. A leak in the apartment upstairs, a problem with the building's plumbing, anything except the possibility that Jimmy Thomas had been right about Jumbies and dead friends who wouldn't stay dead. But deep down, I was starting to think that maybe some stories were true after all. The wet footprints were just the beginning. Over the next week, my apartment turned into some kind of supernatural highway. Every night brought new visits from things that looked and sounded exactly like my dead friends, but weren't. I knew they weren't. Jimmy's warnings had made that crystal clear, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your gut are two completely different things. The first time I saw Miguel standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m., casually leaning against the counter like he'd done 1,000 times before, my heart nearly exploded with relief. He looked perfect. Same messy black hair, same crooked smile, same expensive clothes that somehow always looked effortlessly put together. "Jazz, there you are," he said, and his voice was exactly right, warm and familiar, and tinged with that slight accent he got when he was tired. "I've been looking everywhere for you." For about 3 seconds, I forgot he was dead. My brain just couldn't process the contradiction between what I was seeing and what I knew to be true. I actually took a step toward him before the smell hit me. Salt water and something else, something rotten underneath. "You're not Miguel," I whispered. His smile never wavered. "Come on, don't be like that. We're waiting for you. Keith's got this amazing story about the swim, and Colton actually admitted he was scared for a minute there. You have to hear it. You're dead. All of you are dead. Dead." He laughed, and it sounded so much like Miguel that tears started running down my face. "We're more alive than we've ever been. The water here is incredible, Jazz. You can breathe it like air, and it's warm, and there's this whole world down there that nobody knows about. We want to show you." I backed toward my bedroom, keeping my eyes on him. "Get out of my apartment." "Why would I leave? This is where you are." He pushed off from the counter and started walking toward me, and that's when I noticed his feet weren't quite touching the floor. "We miss you. It's not the same without our voice of reason." I slammed my bedroom door and locked it, then dragged my dresser in front of it for good measure. From the other side, I could hear Miguel's voice getting fainter, like he was moving away. "We'll wait for you, Jazz. We've got all the time in the world." Then silence. I didn't sleep that night, or the next one, or the one after that. Keith showed up on Tuesday, sitting cross-legged on my fire escape like he was waiting for me to notice him. When I looked out the window, he waved and grinned, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. He looked so real, so alive, so much like himself, that I almost opened the window before I caught myself. "Hey, stranger," he called through the glass. "You look terrible. When's the last time you slept?" I pulled the curtains shut, but I could still hear his voice. "I know you're scared, but there's nothing to be afraid of. Remember that time in college when we went cliff jumping and you were terrified? But you did it anyway, and it was amazing. This is just like that, except better." "You're not Keith," I said to the closed curtains. "Of course I'm Keith. Who else would I be? Come on, Jazz, open the window. I want to tell you about this place we found. It's like nothing you've ever seen. Coral cities and fish that glow like stars and water so clear you can see for miles." Miguel was right about it being an adventure. I turned up my TV to drown him out, but his voice somehow cut through the noise anyway. "We're not complete without you. The four of us, remember. We're supposed to stick together." When I finally looked out the window again an hour later, he was gone, but there were wet handprints on the glass, and the fire escape was dripping like someone had just climbed out of the ocean. Colton was the worst. He showed up Wednesday night while I was trying to force down a sandwich, appearing in my living room like he'd just walked through the wall, which, considering he was dead, he probably had. "Look at you," he said, and his voice had that familiar edge of disgust that used to make me want to punch him. "Sitting here feeling sorry for yourself while your friends are waiting for you. My friends are dead. Your friends are free." He looked exactly like himself. Same stocky build, same work clothes, same perpetual scowl. "And you're being a coward, just like always." Even knowing he wasn't real, wasn't actually Colton, the words still stung, because they sounded like something the real Colton would have said. "You always thought you were better than us," he continued, starting to pace around my coffee table. "Always warning us about this, lecturing us about that. But when it came down to it, you were too scared to take the leap. I was trying to keep you alive. You were trying to control us, just like you're trying to control this situation now, hiding in here like a scared little girl instead of coming to see what we found." I closed my eyes and tried to block him out, but his voice kept going. "Miguel and Keith, they're too nice to say it, but I'm not. You failed us, Jazz. You let us go into that water alone, and now you won't even come see where we ended up. Some friend you are." When I opened my eyes, he was standing right in front of me, close enough that I should have been able to feel his breath. But there was nothing, just the smell of seawater and decay. "Come with us," he said, and for the first time his voice was gentle, almost pleading. "Don't make us wait anymore." I ran to my bedroom and slammed the door, but I could hear him laughing on the other side. By Thursday, I'd stopped trying to sleep altogether. Coffee became my best friend, along with energy drinks and pure stubborn terror. I researched everything I could find about jumbies, Caribbean folklore, water spirits, anything that might explain what was happening to me. Most of it was useless, tourist websites and academic papers that treated the whole thing like quaint local color. But buried in a few obscure sources, I found references to spirits that could take the form of the drowned, using familiar faces to lure the living into the water. They fed on life force, growing stronger with each victim, and they were patient. They could wait years for the right moment, the right weakness to exploit. The physical evidence of their visits was getting harder to ignore. Every morning I'd wake up to find new puddles of salt water throughout my apartment, even though I'd checked and double-checked that all my windows and doors were locked. The smell of the ocean lingered in my bedroom, and sometimes I'd find sand between my sheets even though I hadn't been to a beach since returning from the island. My windows started showing scratches on the outside, like someone was trying to claw their way in. The scratches formed patterns that almost looked like letters, but I couldn't make out what they were supposed to say. I called in sick to work again. Then again, my supervisor left increasingly concerned voicemails that I didn't return. My neighbors probably thought I'd lost my mind. I'd started barricading my door every night with furniture, and I'd covered all my windows with blankets so I couldn't see out and hopefully whatever was out there couldn't see in. But it didn't matter. They found ways to get to me anyway. Friday night, all three of them showed up at once. I was sitting at my kitchen table trying to write down everything that had happened. If these things succeeded in getting me, I wanted someone to find a record, some explanation for why I'd disappeared. Maybe it would help the next person, though I doubted anyone would believe it. That's when I heard Miguel's laugh from my living room, Keith's voice humming from the bathroom, and Colton's heavy footsteps in the hallway, all at the same time, like they were coordinating their approach. "Jazz," Miguel called out. "We know you're here. We can smell your fear. Come on out," Keith added, his voice bright and cheerful like he was inviting me to a party. "We've got so much to show you." "Stop being such a baby," Colton growled from somewhere near my bedroom door. "You can't hide in there forever." I gripped my pen tighter and kept writing, documenting every detail I could remember. The wet footprints, the scratches on the windows, the way they looked exactly like my friends but smelled like death and seawater. Someone needed to know what had really happened here. The voices got closer, more insistent. They started talking over each other, a chorus of familiar voices saying terrible things. "The water's so warm, Jazz. You'll love it here. We're lonely without you. It's not the same. You owe us this. You let us die. Just open the door. Just for a minute. We miss you so much. You're being selfish. Please, Jazz. Please come with us." I forced myself to keep writing, to ignore the voices that sounded so much like my friends that my heart was breaking all over again. Because they weren't my friends. My friends were dead, drowned in dark water because they'd been too drunk and stubborn to listen to reason. These things were just wearing their faces, using their voices to try to trick me into the same fate. The calling continued, growing more desperate, more pleading. All three voices blended together outside my kitchen window now, so close I could almost feel them pressing against the glass. "Jazz, please, we need you. Don't leave us alone down here. It's beautiful, I promise. You'll see. Just come to the window. Just look at us. We love you. We've always loved you. Come home, Jazz. Come home to us." I gripped my pen until my knuckles went white and forced myself to look away from the window, to focus on the words I was writing instead of the voices that were calling my name with such perfect, heartbreaking familiarity. Because I knew that if I looked, if I acknowledged them, if I gave them even the smallest invitation, they'd finally have what they needed to drag me down into whatever dark place they'd made their home. The calling continued as I wrote my final words. Three voices pleading for me to come outside and be with them forever.